This episode of the ResortLoop.com podcast is brought to you by Joffrey's Coffee and Tea Company. Joffrey's is proud to be the official specialty coffee of Disney. Enjoy drinks and pastries at Joffrey's kiosks throughout the parks and check out the Disney Specialty Coffee Collection only at Joffreys.com.
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Please board quickly and safely. Our monorail will be departing momentarily. Thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm Tim Scott.
I'm Bob Collar.
This is ResortLoop.com. This is another big number for us. This is episode 300.
303 years, Tim, and I don't think we could have a bigger show for Looper Nation today. This is, we are just so thrilled to have with us some big names in Hollywood and in the entertainment business. These guys, before we get started, I got to tell you, this documentary that we're going to talk about, it won awards at the San Francisco International Film Festival, at the Melbourne International Film Festival, and it is one of the most beautifully written, beautifully directed, produced documentaries I have ever seen in my life. Brought me to tears at least 3 different times. We are thrilled to welcome the producers and directors of The Boys, the Sherman Brothers Story, actually the Sherman cousins, Jeff and Gregg Sherman. Guys, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Well, thanks for having us and for all those lovely words about the film and our dads.
Yes, we appreciate them all, and we appreciate the fact that it resonates with people outside of people with the last name Sherman.
Absolutely. I mean, it is just such an incredible. If anybody out there in Looper Nation has not seen this film yet, you got to see it. It's available on Amazon and other places, but just such a great documentary on, of course, the Sherman brothers, right? Richard and Robert, but also the Disney company as a whole. So you really want to check that out. But guys, how did the making of the film even happen? I mean, how did you guys come together to make this film?
It's a long process, but basically, Jeff and I, as we set out in the premise of the film, we grew up really not knowing each other, and it was a little known fact that our dads did not socialize whatsoever. And when we say that, that means I never set foot in my cousin Jeff's house, and they lived 7 blocks away. They never set foot in our house. Whenever there would be a Sherman Brothers event, and growing up, there were 50 motion pictures, thousands of different songs, and who knows how many times that we would have been in the same room. We were just kind of told, at least on my end, it's better this way, just wave hello, and they're there. We knew they existed. We just didn't have any connection to them whatsoever.
We got the same thing on our side. This is Jeff talking. And, it was always mysterious to us. And Greg and I knew each other to wave. We really never hung out. It was just sort of this strange wall that existed. But when we were older, we both went to the opening of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang in London, the stage version. And we, as always, the norm for us was we walked in, and my family, the Bob Shermans, were seated at one side of the balcony, and the Dick Shermans were seated at the other side of the balcony.
Well, it wasn't the balcony; it was the Royal Circle. And when you're in London, I'm just saying, it was opening night, and it was pretty cool. And I was seated in front of Harvey Weinstein and next to Andrew Lloyd Webber. So This was actually some good seats. But the point is that we were seated on opposite sides of this Royal Circle. And at the end of the performance, the orchestra turned to our dads, who were again seated on opposite sides, and asked them to stand up for this standing ovation. And they each took a bow and looked to each other and gave each other a little hand signal. And when Jeff and I got to the after party, which was amazing, by the way, the Broccolis know how to throw a party. Little known fact, just in case your listeners don't know this, Ian Fleming, who wrote all the James Bond books, had a son who felt kind of slighted by the fact that he spent so much time working on the James Bond stuff. And he said, I think you love James Bond more than you love me. And his dad set out to write one children's book, which was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And
so Cubby Broccoli owned that among all he bought all the Ian Fleming books, and he came to our dad's right after Disney had, well, I guess Disney had still was alive.
He gave them permission.
He gave them permission to get out of their contract long enough to do the Chitty movie, which was wonderful. But anyway, so we're at this after party, and I saw Gregg, and now I'm an adult, and I'm there on my own, and I just walked over to him and I said, do you know what happened with our families? And he said, I'm so glad you asked me. And we sat down, and for the first time in our entire lives, really, we sat down and talked for literally hours. We were the last people at the party.
It was a good party. And we ended up continuing the conversation back in Los Angeles, where we both live. And that led to us thinking about doing something along the lines of a biopic and doing something about our dads. Because what we both felt was that our dads had very different viewpoints in the world, but no one really knew who they were. They could sing, dozens of their songs, but no one actually connected them with the immense body of work.
And our dads are getting older. My dad, it was only a few years before he passed that we made the movie. And we just kind of wanted to record them and get them on film while they were still able to talk for themselves. And really, when you watch the Sherman Brothers story, I would say 2/3 of it is just our dads speaking, in their own way, on opposite sides of the planet. When we recorded, my dad was in England and Dick was in Beverly Hills. And but they tell the same stories and come at them slightly differently, which was really fun for us when we were cutting it together. People always go, wow, I forget that they're not sitting in the same room when I watch the movie.
And you can see the shorthand of having worked as partners and as brothers and as tunesmiths for so long, that you could see how they got to various points of really interesting melodies and lyrics because of their varying viewpoints. It was fascinating to watch this happen for us.
So we got together and we started doing this as a biopic, and every place we went, including Disney, as a matter of fact, they said, we didn't really know the Sherman Brothers. They hadn't really even heard of them, but everybody knew their songs, as Gregg said. So we decided to do this thing, but we couldn't find anything. Well, Roy Disney, the late Roy Disney, had seen the film, and so had Tom Schumacher, who's the head of Disney Theatrical.
Oh, you're getting ahead. There's one really interesting thing that we did.
Okay.
And it was Jeff's idea, actually. We were sitting at Art's Deli in Los Angeles. It was one of the better delis. And it was now, years had passed, and the opening of Mary Poppins was going to happen in New York City. It had opened in London, but now it was going to open in New York. And Jeff and I were just having lunch, and we realized our dads hadn't spoken the whole time from like 2002 to 2006. They hadn't spoken at all. That they had really kind of reached a point where they were living their own lives. And we realized that the opening of Mary Poppins might want to be one of the last times they actually see each other, which turned out to be true. And Jeff said, why don't we just roll camera on them both days and just see what we get and interview a few people?
So we hired 2 camera crews, one following my father, one following Gregg's dad. And you see that in the film. Where our story ends is really where we began in the documentary.
But we self-funded this. We just decided we'd cash advance credit cards and hit up a couple of our close friends and relatives, not our family, but other people, for money to just seed money to show what it would be like if we actually did this as a feature film.
So we created a 25-minute piece just based on the interviews we've got around the opening of Poppins, and also a few back here in town, some key people really. And we showed that to a few people. We showed it to Roy Disney and to Tom Schumacher, who's the head of Disney Theatrical in New York. And they both called Dick Cook, who was the head of the studio, and I got a call at home. And it was Dick Cook's assistant. She said, will you hold for Dick Cook? And he said, yeah, I hear you got something great. Can you come in tomorrow with your cousin and show it to me? So we brought the 25-minute film up to his private screening room up in the Team Disney building. And it was a little intense because it was really, this movie could be made only by Disney because the bulk of their work was done there. And as the lights were going down, I said, if we're going to make this, we have to do it here. And he goes, oh, I'm well aware. And we watched him I could watch him. He was sat down right next to me in this sort of big screening room. And I was a little intimidated, but I watched him and I saw him wipe a little tear away from his eye as the lights were coming up. And he said, boys, why don't you come in tomorrow? We'll make this as a documentary. And we looked at each other. We wanted to say, but we wanted to do a biofilm. But we went, okay, we'll do the documentary. And that's how it became, that's how it was set into motion.
Wow.
And the next day we sat with every head of every department. It was crazy, and we had full support. One attorney, it was funny. Our dads wrote how many 500 songs at least for Disney Studios, and one attorney in the group said, "Well, guys, all you can have is 12 songs. So we have 100 here and 1,000 published songs, plus the ones that you don't know about." And there was another guy who was Mitch Lieb, who is this wonderful guy at Disney in the music department. He's the head of Hollywood Records, and I'm not sure what else, but he came aside to us and he said, "Guys, your dad and uncle built the Walt Disney Music Department. You can have as many songs in this as you want." So we have 160 songs or so in the movie.
There was a lot of pushback, as we went through the process. There were a lot of people and there were a lot of rules at Disney Studios, and we got to violate a few of them. Among the two that stand out to me, one is showing Walt Disney and showing the likeness of Walt Disney. We had Diane Disney and her husband, Ron Miller, giving us all kinds of wonderful footage and stills and things that had never been seen before, and all the rights that we could have to be able to show Walt as a three-dimensional human being. And the other one, as a side note, was that there was an executive who said, "Well, you can't show people smoking. We don't show people smoking in Disney movies."
Our dads smoked pipes and cigars and cigarettes the entire time they wrote every picture we had, and and Disney pictures and everybody. It was
and
funny.
As did Walt. Walt was a big smoker too.
Right.
That was just what people did in the 50s and 60s. And so we said, it's a documentary and we're going to do this. And so once we kind of bypassed him and went over his head to get what we needed, we added three-dimensional smoke and shots and had things going through smoke. We had cigarettes everywhere.
The great thing was it edged us up, because the smoking images got us a PG-13 rating on this documentary. So.
Really?
Is that what did it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Tim picked that out. He said, "Did you notice the smoke?"
I did. I was going to bring that up later. Those stills, the work you did with those is amazing.
Yeah, there were just a couple of shots where we just decided, hey, by the way, yes, we are going to have cigarettes in this film. Not that either of us smoked, just that it was reflective of what we were doing, an honest documentary.
We had our graphic artist do a couple of mock-ups for us with them taking the cigarettes out of the hands, and you just wonder why they're holding their hand up that way without a cigarette. It just looked stupid.
Right.
Right. Sure.
Excellent. How long did it take to make this documentary, between all the research and everything you had to do until final release?
All our lives, plus about 4 years of on and off.
Yeah, 4 years of production, but we had started talking because we were going to do the biopic, as we mentioned, and we talked to both our dads endlessly, probably for 3 years prior to that.
Right.
And came up with a full kind of a narrative story, a way of telling their individual stories and their things as a scripted movie like Ray or, something like that.
And then we actually had an extra year after that where we took all our footage, and some of it didn't fit the narrative of our storyline, but it was still compelling and interesting stuff, especially to Disney fans. And so that was so lovely. Bob Iger personally gave us a budget so that we could spend a year and make these wonderful little bonus features, which ended up running about an hour's worth on the DVD, that are for real Disney fans and real fans of their music, that just show the process and show their differences and show all kinds of interesting things about the park.
Yeah, there's a great section on the theme parks, and just because if you go to the theme parks, when Greg and I go, we always laugh because I hear my dad's and uncle's music everywhere I walk in that park. It's just everywhere.
It's a great feeling. I mean, things that you wouldn't think about, songs off of different, not as successful pictures, but songs that fit perfectly as you're walking down Main Street or going into different places on the carousel and everything. It's just lovely. It's a great feeling,
Absolutely.
It has to be awesome.
Yeah. That's, I said that this film brought me to tears at least 3 times. I've seen it over a half dozen times now, and every time it brings a tear to your eye. You said the Disney executive, he had a tear in his eye. How emotional was it for you guys to produce this film?
Well, it should be said, we are both emotional people. So we definitely ran the gamut of emotions, to elation, to unhappiness, to tears of joy, to tears of frustration, because we were dealing with doing something that was on a grand scale, and we knew nothing we'd ever do in our careers would ever be more personal and we had to get it right. And every aspect of it, we had to get right. And because we were working together for the first time and telling a half of a story that we weren't as intimately familiar, it led to a lot of frustration and a lot of joy. I mean, as I always say to Jeff, the greatest thing for me to come out of doing this film was I really didn't know my uncle very well. And I got to know him not so much by the interviews we did, but because I'd be out in London and I'd spend days and we'd go to dinners and I'd sit in his apartment, we'd talk. And I really felt like that was the most treasured thing I could take from this. And it was extremely emotional and extremely gratifying.
I knew Dick a little bit because mostly, it's interesting, I spent a lot of time in my dad and uncle's office growing up because I love music. I'm a composer myself and love to hear all the things, and I'd play stuff for Dick. And I knew him there. I knew him when I was a little kid. We were really close. I have lots of pictures to prove it. But after I was about 5 or 6 years old, we didn't really see him very much at all, except at social events. And then it wasn't a close thing. So I had the same experience. But I think what was really interesting for me and for Gregg was we got to interview people that knew our dads throughout various periods of their life. So most people know their parents as sort of like an older person that's a father or mother figure. And we got to see our dads as boys. You know, we interviewed Sam Goldwyn Jr., who the late wonderful man, Sam Goldwyn Jr., and he had been my dad's best friend and grew up with little Dick kind of annoying them in the house. And we got, we got the sense of them as like three-dimensional characters. So that was wonderful. And I really got to ask my dad, and I know Gregg did too, things that, would be uncomfortable outside of about these things. What were the problems? What were the best parts of these, of their relationships? With each other, with their writing partner, brother, and it was fascinating just to do that. So, and then there's the other thing which is wonderful. We traveled a bit with the film after it was done, and it went to several film festivals, as you mentioned. One of them was in Annecy, France, and Gregg and I went out there, and it was a sort of a mix-up because they asked us to have it dubbed into French. Or into subtitles, and Disney accidentally shipped the wrong one without the subtitles, so there was a delay. We'd gone all the way out to France for this film festival, and there was such a delay. They were looking for another print, and they couldn't find it, so they just put that one up, which didn't bother anyone. They all, they knew the songs, and most of them spoke English anyway. Sure. But it sort of killed our time to have a Q&A, and afterward, everybody was really disappointed to the point where they surrounded us. There were a couple hundred people from all over the world at this international festival asking us questions, having us sign international copies of the films. And I looked at Gregg, and we both thought it looked like It's a Small World had come to life. It was it created this thing. It was very emotional. It was lovely.
Sure.
What was also fascinating, too, is that we would go to different film festivals, and that one was an exception just because there was a delay and it didn't happen the way it usually did, which was we'd show the film, we'd talk, we'd do a little Q&A, we'd something along the lines of what we're doing now. And then after the movie and after the Q&A, people would queue up no matter where we were because they wanted to relate to us their personal story of their family and their disconnect and their dysfunction. And that was the strangest, most interesting and somewhat gratifying thing, because Jeff and I sat in a dark room editing this thing for years and years and years thinking, isn't our family strange that we grew up so close yet so far apart? And so many people needed to tell us, like my mom and her sister, and I want to show this to them. And this became like a cautionary tale for people. And we did not expect that. That was like a really interesting perk and benefit for us. And that was emotional as well, because we're able to do some good because, although we did set out with two goals, one of which was to connect our dads to their work. The other one was to try and bridge the gap between them. But I think it was a little too late for us on that front. So it's an emotional journey for us.
The truth of it is, because sometimes people go, oh, they hated each other. They didn't really hate each other. No. They just lived different lives. They had been so locked up in a room together that they needed to kind of get out and do things. But there was this disconnect. They deeply loved each other. Like if you said anything about the other one, they would, they'd attack you. They adored each other, but they just didn't really have much to do with each other as time went on.
Right. And in the documentary, when Jeff, your dad talks about being in World War II, and then Gregg, your dad says how the gap between them was only 2 years, but after he came back, it was almost 20 years.
That's true.
That does change people, and I'm sure their outlook on life was a little bit different too. So
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd gone and seen the darkest parts of the war. He was fighting in Germany, liberated Dachau concentration camp, and being a Jewish man and seeing that, it turned him internal and made him really look for things. And a lot of people, now we call it post-traumatic stress or whatever. And I'm sure he had it. He used to have those nightmares and all that. And Dick didn't have that experience. Dick was in the military, but he was stationed in California and just didn't have, and that is enough to really, drive a big divide between the two.
I think they always had that divide personality-wise. And I think that a lot of times it's a whole nature versus nurture thing. And I think Bob, my uncle, who sought out going to World War II, who as a 17-year-old wanted to go and have that experience and felt the need to fight for our country and everything, and got special dispensation to be able to go out there, wanted to have that. Whereas my dad would run away from anything remotely close to that, and has successfully, for the last 87, almost 88 years, done a very good job of running away from any kind of conflict. So, I feel like that they were destined to have these very different ways of looking at
But the
world.
cool thing is our grandfather, as we talked about in the movie, was a very successful Tin Pan Alley songwriter. And he was a Russian immigrant, came over and worked with different collaborators through his life. And so they grew up in that same house and in that exposure to the music and the theory of the music and everything else that they would garner from our grandfather, Al Sherman. But, their life experiences were so different that made a really unusual collaboration for them, because they had the same basis of things, but they looked at the world differently.
They used to use the word stereoptic
Right.
in the way they looked at the world, in that it came from a left and right channel, but mixed properly, it gave it a very rich sound. And I think that is the reason we're sitting here so many years after the songs they've written, talking about their music and talking about their work, is that it resonated because they came from unique but different and complementary points of view.
Absolutely.
And it comes through in songs, like every song, actually, but some more than others in a major way. And they stay with us.
And my dad never liked depressing projects or depressing things. He really didn't love that stuff. He said, there's so much depression in the world. Let's bring happiness and light. And that was always his thing. And Dick's that way too. So
they sure did.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's in there. I mean, they bottled it up in those, when you listen to them, you're hearing them speak and sing to you.
Well, Jeff and Greg, after you got done with the film, did your parents get a chance to see it? What was their reaction if they did get to see it?
Well, again, it was different. My dad, who lives in Los Angeles, we used to joke that he'd circle the edit bay and come back in, every once in a while. Can I see another couple minutes?
Oh,
and he I got a new couple of pictures for you.
Oh, yeah, we'd say, do you have any pictures of you guys, like, hanging out together when you're kids? He'd come with shopping bags full of them, and it was like he was right there. It was like a funny comedy bit.
And we can't tell you how important that was for us to have a resource that was actually one of the subjects of the documentary. I was excited about it. I think when it was finally put together, and it took on a different emotion for my dad and a different perspective for him, because it wasn't just two guys sitting in a room darkly working at little different pieces, but it was actually something that other people had an emotional reaction to, his friends, his family, his people that he worked with. Suddenly it was a totally different thing for him. And it changed how I think he perceived the film, because it wasn't just a little movie. It suddenly became something much bigger for him.
And my dad, Bob, was living in London. He lived the last 10 years of his life in London and didn't really travel a whole lot, didn't come here except for my wedding, I think, maybe a couple of times. And so he would see it in different cuts in London, and I guess he was a little nervous about how we were portraying it at first, and then he came around. We interviewed him 8 times, and there was stuff he talked about. And he said, I don't want to put that in there. But when he saw the finished film on the way back from that Annecy Festival, I stopped in London, and we watched it together. And then he read every review. And he was like tearing up, and he said, "Thank you so much. This is just such a beautiful gift." And he was especially happy that we had also talked about Al, that his father and Dick's father,
right.
and put him in his place in music history as well.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, you have come from such a talented family. Your grandmother was a silent film actress, and I mean, just unbelievable. The talent. Yeah,
we had band leaders before that, and first chair clarinetists and violinists.
Wow.
Yeah, it goes back many generations, and it's going forward. Both Jeff and I have our own sets of Sherman Brothers. We both have 2 boys, and
everybody's musical.
Everybody's musical.
Oh, wow.
Everybody's talented, and we could brag about our kids too. But my oldest son is about to graduate USC as a hip hop major because
wow.
Yes, exactly. Except at USC, but he is a tremendously talented lyricist and rapper, and he really wants to pursue that as a career. And a lot of times people would say, well, maybe you should have a plan B. I'm telling him to go for it because it's in his blood. He loves it. He is so committed, and it's beautiful to see it continue.
And my son, Alex Sherman, he's almost 25, and he just recorded his first album, 10 original songs, and he's a singer-songwriter. Labels are looking at it right now, and he's terrific. He's just so it's really kind of cool because you do see the genes coming to play. I guess it's pretty amazing.
That's
it really
wonderful. Yeah, that's wonderful, and it's great that you guys are encouraging them and helping them, push them forward. So we want to switch gears a little bit. I mean, the documentary stands on its own. Obviously, it's just like I said, it's brilliantly done. Everybody needs to see it, but we want to find out a little bit about you guys. So our big question, one of our big questions was, what was that growing up with Richard and Robert Sherman? I mean, come on.
As like most people, we had 5 pianos in our house. So
wow,
that's like my house. Yeah,
exactly. We just have one.
Sure. Including, by the way, not to bring up anything too sore of a subject, but my grandfather Al, whom we've mentioned a few times, gave me an upright piano that still sits in my dad's house. Well, anytime you want it, son, it does sit in a very important place. I do need that piano, but if you ever want it,
isn't that the piano he plays in the beginning of the movie?
Yes, it is. It's in that little room. We bookend the movie with my dad playing piano in the beginning and in the end, and that's an interesting story too. But we're getting away from the documentary. But the point is, my house growing up, at any given point when we'd be sitting at dinner or whatever, my dad would just sort of mysteriously leave the conversation mentally and then physically run to one of the closest pianos and start working. He was working nonstop, and he was always, and continues to always be writing. He is working today. He's got several songs coming out in the new Jungle Book movie that he's reworked, and a couple of new ones. And he's constantly working. There's a sequel to Mary Poppins. He just wrote a couple songs for the parks, and his output is constant. Whether he's actually getting them produced or whatever, he is always writing. And that was what it was like. And plus, we had some real perks when we went to Disneyland together.
We'll get to that.
In my house, it was a little different. My dad was really, he was a Renaissance man. And music was one thing he did. He wrote poetry. He wrote short stories. He created all kinds of artwork, metal sculptures. Every wall in our house was like an obsession of his, was painting. So there were hundreds of paintings of his. I'm not kidding. All over the house, beautiful stuff. And he didn't really talk about it. He would come home from work, and I'd be doing my homework, and he'd throw me my baseball glove, and he'd say, "Let's go play catch." And I just had a regular dad. He really didn't. He kept all of his awards up in his bathroom till my mom built a room because she was tired of people saying, "Can you go up to your dad's bathroom and get the Oscar?" So she built that stuff. But he was very much, for him it was part of his life, but it didn't completely define him, I think, the way it did with Dick. I mean,
and then it led to a little bit of their frustration because what we discovered and what we decided before we even started this film is that there's no wrong person. There's no finger pointing. It's two very different points of view. And for my uncle, it was like, look, yes, we do this, but I have other things I'd like to be able to do in my life. And for my dad, it was like, why would you want to do anything but this? This is it. This is all there is to it. And nobody's wrong in that situation. It's just two very different points of view. And it did cause them some tension and frustration. But that's basically a lot of what fueled their incredible output.
But the great thing was, they asked about like the unusual things in our household, which we didn't really talk about in the movie, but my dad would come home every day and they would do demos almost every day. They would write several songs every day at Disney. And Dad would come home and he had this stereo. My dad would always turn on the stereo starting at the highest volume. I'm surprised he didn't blow his speakers every time. This reminded me of Admiral Boom in Mary Poppins, how the piano would go off. Everybody would just jump and go, oh, Dad, somebody's got a demo. And so we'd go down. My little brother was too young. He wasn't born yet. But my two sisters and I would listen to these demos. And we, keep them, and we'd start doing little dance numbers with my dad's canes, and we heard everything first.
Oh,
so
wow.
we would kind of imagine what Jolly Holiday was, or It's a Small World, or whatever, and kind of create these little dance numbers and do them for my dad, and he'd just crack up about that.
Wow.
My dad did blow out several speakers.
And actually, we have you, Jeff, to thank for A Spoonful of Sugar. That is what a great story.
Yeah, I mean, passively I'm involved, but yes, it's in the movie we talk about it. But they'd written a song. They'd written all the songs for Mary Poppins, and they championed Julie Andrews coming out and being Mary Poppins. She came out. She heard all the songs, and there was one song. Their favorite song was called "Through the Eyes of Love," and she just didn't like it. It was a little too on the head for her. So she said, I like all of them, but that one I'm just not sure about. And they were really depressed because they'd really gone to bat for her. And here she kind of knocked out the song she liked. So they tried to come up with a catchphrase or something that like a stitch in time saves nine or something, like trying to think of something. And it happened just that way. I came home. My dad was sitting in a dark room, mourning the loss of his favorite song for the movie. And he said, "How was your day?" And I said, well, I got the polio vaccine at school today, and I was notorious for pushing over that tray of booster shots and running out of the doctor. So he couldn't believe somebody gave me a shot at school, and I let him do it. I said, no. They took out a plastic spoon and put a sugar cube in and put the medicine in, and he ate it. And he looked at me, and he started tapping his hand on a table, and he said, and he kind of put his finger up, and he was like instantly lost in thought. He went over and called Dick, and they went and wrote "A Spoonful of Sugar Helps the Medicine Go Down."
Wow.
Incredible. So I yes, I'm somewhat involved, but I just happened to get a polio vaccine that day. So that's my little corner of their career there.
Well, Tim, this is usually where I say, that's all I've got.
I know.
But
there's just so much good stuff here. I think we need to save it up for another show.
That's right. This is actually only part one of our interview with the Sherman cousins. This is very exciting. You guys got to stick around for part two, our next show. Tim, we're not quite done yet.
There's still more?
Well, had we known we were going to be able to talk to the Sherman cousins for as long as we were, we probably would have thought this out a little bit better.
That's true.
But we still got a contest to give away.
Let's give stuff away.
What are we doing with this con? We've got to give them the next clues, right? Or
yes.
The next quotes.
The week 2 quotes.
Week 2 quotes of what did Walt Disney say?
Yes.
So go ahead, Tim. You start us off with quote number 1. Remember, folks, all you got to do is you got to pick out which quote was actually Walt Disney's. Email them to us at contest@ResortLoop.com, and we will compile the winners and pick through the randomizer who wins all of the wonderful stuff we have to give away.
Yes, the first choice is, we are not trying to entertain the critics. I'll take my chances with the public.
All right. B is going to be, faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. Ooh.
Third one, men don't care what's on TV. They only care what else is on TV.
That's me anyway. And finally, D, the very last one, never hate your enemies. It affects your judgment. So those are the 4 quotes that we will have for this week's contest entries. And again, every Friday we're going to do this. And Tim, what will they win at the end of the month?
The ResortLoop.com prize package will consist of a box of the Joffrey's K-Cups, a Joffrey's mug, coffee mug, a ResortLoop.com coffee mug.
Ooh.
I know, and the best part is an assortment of the highly coveted ResortLoop.com pins.
We have an assortment?
Well, we have more than one.
And don't forget, that's not all.
There's
Tim.
more?
There's more. There's always more. Don't you watch infomercials? We're also going to give you 1 free year of a full membership to My Diz Match. So there's that as well.
Fantastic.
So that is all we've got, Tim.
I think that's more than enough. Once again, thank you to the Sherman cousins.
Yeah, Jeff and Greg, thank you so much, guys.
Oh, that was emotional just talking to them.
Yes, it was.
It was awesome. Thank you, everyone. You've been listening to The Gateway to the Magic.
See you, everybody.